She was then arrested and taken to the Old Hallwood. These confessions initiated the North Berwick witch trials of 1590, the first major witch persecution in Scotland. They were the spark that lit the flame o' the burning times. During these lengthy trials, there were many counter-allegations, many different things said, as there were 70 people that were believed to have been executed during the trials. And the king himself, King James VI, he became personally interested when he heard that witches were raising storms to prevent him bringing his new bride Anne across the water to Scotland. The main depositions against this young lassie, who they estimate was still in her teenage years, were as follows. That way other witches, she had sailed on the 34th, and they had met a witch for Copenhagen, and they had plotted and schemed, and the deal had raised a storm that wrecked both land and sea at Michaelmas. That in Ormiston Woods, the witches met. On the ground there was a piece of rope. And Julius, she grew on that rope, saying this: "Haul, haul, haul away, we shall haul up a master." And the earth trembled, and up popped the devil's head. And Julius asked him, "Will you destroy David Seaton?" To which he replied, "Yes." And he gave the witches some bits of broken glass mixed with cord, and he told them to scatter them in the woods. But instead of this affecting Satan, this malice was alighted to his daughter instead. Then it was alleged that Julius, along with others, had created a waxen image of His Majesty. It had been wrapped up in white linen, and they passed it around the group. And each person there chanted his name: James the Sixth, down, James the Sixth, down, and then it was melted in the fire. And it was at this same meeting that Agnes Sampson, the healer, had brought along a bottle of Aryan urine mixed with toad droppings. And this was to be put in His Majesty's way to cause his demise. And they also said, worst of all, that at least 100 witches gathered on the Old Kirk Green in North Berwick. And that during this Sabbath, Julius played the very song that you've just heard, or at least the first two lines: "Come and go ye afore, come and go ye." And that she played. On her mutha, She was the first person in recorded history to ever play one of these. And she played this unholy sound to raise the devil. And the pulpit was lit with black candles. And when the deal appeared, he appeared as a muckle black man with a long black cloak and a skull bonnet on top of his head. And this terrible sight was something to behold, and that each person there paid homage to the deal. First of all, it was the women, and they turned 6 times widowshins, while the men, they turned 9 times widowshins, an unholy movement that creates evil. It is against God and against the way of the Son. At this meeting, the deal commanded that they open up 3 graves, 2 within the graveyard and one without, and that from these graves they take fingers and toes and the noses of the corpses, and that each witch there should be given some, and they should make this into corpse powder, and they should spread this about the land to do evil. At the end of their great Sabbath, the devil raised his cloak, and every witch kissed his arse. Well, you might imagine all this talk of devils and raising storms. It perked the interest of the king, because Gaius was also accused of taking part in a diabolical ritual where a cat was baptised in the crook of a chimney, where bits of bodies were sewn onto its paws, and it was flung into the pier head at Leith to raise a storm. And he called the young girl to come before him. You can imagine. Who was she compared to His Majesty the King? She was just a maidservant, just a young lassie for Trinent, an ordinary young lassie who had the unfortunate luck to work for an evil man who had broken her spirit and made her accuse all these other people and all these terrible things. So even though her fingers were crushed by the pilliwinks, she was forced to play her Jew's hair for His Majesty the King and sing, "Come and go ye, for come and go ye." It was said that just before her execution on the 4th of December in the year 1591, that she fell to her knees and she begged God's forgiveness. Not for being a witch, but for condemning other innocents to death. She gave the names of Barbara Napier and Euphemia McCalsey for Edinburgh, and she swore that they were innocent and that she would sinking ships. I do not know if God was listening to that young woman on that day, or what happened to her immortal soul. But I do know the flames burned bright that night above Castle Hill in Edinburgh. This is Margaret Bartley, a young mother for the tomb of Irvine. And it was said that Margaret brought a petition of slander to the court session, saying that her brother-in-law, John Dean, and his wife Janet had called her a thief. But the Kirk, they declared that the parties should shake hands and move on. But it was said that Margaret stood more ill will than a hurt for what had been wrongly said against her. And not long after that, a vagabond called John Stewart was travelling through Irvine, and he foolishly implied to the provost's wife that her husband's ship had been lost at sea. Margaret was said to have cursed the ship called the gift of God, saying these words, that I hope that ship will sink to the bottom, and that the crew will be eaten by partisans, for neither sea nor salt water shall hold it. A few weeks later, two men for the ship that had sailed with John Dean and the Lord Provost at Irvine returned, and they said that all in the ship had been sunk. Well, immediately suspicion fell upon the vagabond, who was quickly arrested. And suspicion also fell on Margaret for bringing the motion to the Kirk session. John Dean, said that on the night that the ship had set sail, he had went to Margaret Barclay's house, and that there, along with 2 other women, they had made clay figures. One, the provost, Andrew J., and one, her brother-in-law, and one for the gift of God. And that the deer had appeared in the form of a wee black dove. That they had all went to the shore and they flung the clay figures into the sea. And that the sea raged and roared and turned as red as juice in a dyer's cauldron. The beggar was kept under a heavy guard. His arms were bound together. He was visited on the night before the court session met by a minister who asked and pleaded with him that he renounce the devil and ask the Lord's forgiveness. But the beggar man said that he couldn't pray, for his hands were tied together. Perhaps the minister could release his hands. So he unbound the knots and left John Stewart the vagabond to his prayers. And when they come to fetch him for the trial, they found his body hanging against the door, for he had strangled himself with a piece of hemp for his bonnet, rather than face trial, torture, the noose, and burning. He had committed suicide. Before he had died, he named another woman, and her name was Isabel Inch. But despite never seeing him before and denying any involvement with this man, they quickly took her and they put her in the belfry of the Toon Kirk. She was there for several days. She was pressed for a confession by those men, but she gave none. She claimed her innocence. But weary with sleep deprivation and the thought of what was to come, she said that she would confess all the next day if they left her alone that night to have some sleep, to take rest. And despite being bound in stocks, she climbed onto the roof in the belfry. It's not known whether she slipped or whether she flung herself off in desperation. But she was found at the bottom of the tower. She was still alive. She lived for 5 days. And each day and each night they pressed her to confess. But still she wouldn't. And she died. An innocent woman. Next was Margaret Barclay's turn. After what happened to the beggar, the court in their wisdom decided that young Margaret Barclay should face what they termed gentle torture. The only time that term has ever been used in any Scottish witchcraft trial. For how could any torture be gentle? In their wisdom, they decided that Margaret should be placed in the stocks, and her bare legs would be covered with iron weights until she confessed to witchcraft. It was said in the records that when the weight became too much for her to bear, that she cried out, and that they took the weight off, but still she refused to confess. So they put it back on again, and she cried again, and this time she did confess. And she gave the name of a young lassie, 14 years old, called Isabel Crawford. Margaret was taken to trial with her confession secured, and it was said that her husband appeared then with a lawyer, and the lawyer asked, "Do you want to be represented at trial?" She said, "As you please. But all that I have said is untrue and false." And then she turned to her husband and she said, "You have been too long in coming." This statement didn't move the magistrates, who decided that her confession wasn't given under duress of torture. For she gave her confession when the iron bars had been lifted from her legs. And she was sentenced to be executed for witchcraft. But 3 deaths weren't enough for they high men the earthen tomb. Another trial was set for the 14-year-old girl, Isabel. She was to suffer the same gentle torture that Margaret Barclay did. But they didn't count on the spirit of this 14-year-old girl, which was strong for life. And it was said that she withstood more than 30 stones in weight of raw iron placed upon her legs before she broke, and she shouted out, "Tack off, I will tell all." Just before her execution, she denied all that she had said, and she refused to pardon the executioner, as was the tradition, as if anyone could say, "That's okay, that's fine, just take my life." No, it wasn't okay. And this young girl of 14, she knew that this was wrong, but knowing something doesn't stop it from happening. And in the year 1618, she suffered the same end as Margaret Barclay. She was strangled by the hands of the hangman, and her body burnt to ash in the earthen tomb.
Isabel, Isabel.
This is Isabel Gowdy. I am Isabel Gowdy. Each woman here is Isabel Gowdy. Each woman a witch in the pious eyes of righteous men who hunger for the flesh of burning women. I lived in a time of political, social and religious upheaval that created a cauldron of contempt for womankind. I can tell you the truth, but those pious men didn't want to hear the truth for a filthy mouth of a lowly cotter's wife. They wanted tales of salacious events, diabolical occurrences. So I decided to give them exactly what they wanted, for that was the only power that I had. I tell the minister, Harry Forbes, God's elect on earth, of how I, a lowly cotter's wife, met with a deal, a cloven-footed man in his own kirkyard, how he raised the deed up, and how I cursed him with my tongue. That turned his face whiter than the ash of a witch's bones. And I took great pleasure in telling them how I met with the king and the queen of fairies beneath Downey Hill, the place where they made elfin arrows, a place where I was rebranded as a concubine of the deal, but as a wise woman, a world where I could exist without being called sinner, whore, mad bitch of a witch. It was a place of power for folk like me, who spent their days ferming the lands, and who would sit by their hearth at night, wondering why this merciless God believed that I was his eternal enemy. I was only a woman, and I wondered why that God did not care for my soul. Why was I not worthy in his eyes? For according to those pious men, I was worth less than the sheep that grazed on the green fields in Nairnshire. I told them how my coven of 13 witches, we rode across the sky of Loch Loy, how we stole crops, and how we went into the house of all the rich folk there. All these men who sat in judgment of me in the year 1662, and I watched their faces change, the power shift from them to me. They would remember the name of Isabel Gowdy if that was the last thing I could do. That was the only thing that I could do. I told them ridiculous things. Oh, ploughing fields with paddocks. How can you plough a field with a toad? And they believed it. I told them of how we raised the winds across the Moray Firth by taking a rag. We would wet it in water, and then I would take my laundry stick and I would beat it against a stone, and I would say 3 times, I raise the wind in the deil's name, and it shall nae lie until I wish it to lie again. And then, if I wanted to lie the wind, how I would dry that rag and say this charm 3 times. I lay the wind in the deil's name, and he shall nae rise until I wish it again. And if that wind it wouldn't lie, well then I would shout on Red Reaver, my spirit familiar, thief, thief, conjure the wind and cause it to lie. And oh, how the power coursed in my veins when I told them of the size of a devil's member compared to that of a man. Of how, when we broke into the houses, we would pish in the barrels of ale. And I watched the breath stolen for the lungs in the Laird Park. The very man who thought that he could take my body without my consent, and all because I fell on the land with John Gilbert, my husband. And I tell him in front of everyone that I had placed a curse upon him and every male son that he would bear. And I felt the seed shrivel in his privy parts on that day. They called me illiterate. I wasn't that daft. I ken that once you're called witch, 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 that what comes next would be unbearable pain. So I gave them what they wanted. I gave them confessions. And these confessions are still spoken about even 300 years later and more. Did you know that they say that my confessions are the most extraordinary in the whole history of witchcraft? What they say, I was a storyteller, a fancifist, that I was delusional, that I was ill. Well, let me say this to those who do not believe in magic. Everyone knows the name of Isabel Gowdy. I have been remembered, and that is the real magic. The name of the Witch Queen of Scotland shall live on forever. So now I'd like to ask the amazing Carolyn Sutton to come up and say a few words about her fantastic designs behind me.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming. Welcome, thank you for coming. My name is Carolyn Sutton. I am an MFA student at Edinburgh University and studying heritage and exhibition design. And as Rowan said, these two ladies are part of my major project for my program. And the dresses that I've made for each of them, each of the words that we're using against. So for Jamis, is used from Scotland, which was sort of propaganda So my goals with this project have been to restore these women in some small way, to remember who they actually were, and to demonstrate that people were people who attract from all backgrounds and lifestyles. And it shows this method to create conversations about the power of words and to bring this difficult heritage of learning to light. My major project will culminate in this, well, in May. I'll have a total of 13 women represented. I have 7 so far. And after I've laid them all, the next important part for me is to take them all home. So they'll each go back to where they lived, and I'll photograph them there, and that will be part of the project as well. I'll also be making a booklet with their stories and the full text that I've used on each of them. So there'll be a short intermission now, about 15 minutes, I think. You're welcome to come up and see the